Hi guys, this is Art 3 and I'm explaining to our very next unit. So everything I'm about to share with you is on a hyperdoc shared in Schoology. So as usual, you can click to that. In this case, it's going to be in the second 9 weeks file folder and you'll be able to find all that information in Schoology. So let's talk a little bit about two big concepts, figure ground relationship and Gestalt. So this particular unit is really a step up from what you've been doing before. It should be a little bit different. I think you're going to enjoy it. We're going to be working with spray paint and colored pencil. But let's talk a little bit about some important goals that you have for this unit. So there are three things. You're going to have to tell a story, so a narrative, which means that the choices you make and the subjects that you use have to help convey a message or a story. So without words, you have to be able to tell a visual story. It's not as simple as just drawing something. It's about how you organize and the point of view that you choose to use with the assignment that helps tell the story. You need to make some really smart choices with the media that you use. So while we're going to be using spray paint and colored pencil, the way that you choose to use them is going to significantly impact the results you get. And I'll show you a couple examples of that in a few minutes. And the third one is to show a really complex understanding of technical ability. You're at the point now in Honors Art 3, your technical ability, meaning your ability to draw cleanly, to be able to render or draw from observation and see it, and be able to draw it so that it looks like that object, as well as craftsmanship, neatness, attention to design. All of those things should be at a relatively high level. You kind of have graduated from those foundational classes, so you should be taking it a step up. So those are our big goals this time. So two major concepts I want you to understand. Gestalt. Gestalt is the principle of closure. It's when your eye finishes something that it's when your mind finishes something that your eye can't finish. So let me give you an example of that. If you take a look at this little setup here, your mind might tell you that it is a triangle. But if you look at it again closely, obviously your eyes have played little tricks on you. There, in fact, is not a triangle there. That's your mind sort of planting that in there. What we really see when we look and investigate it further is it's three, I call them Pac-Men, or three pizza pies with pie wedges out of them, and they've been removed. So your mind is telling you triangle, but really there's no triangle there. So a lot of times your mind plays tricks because it's so quick to take in all the information, all of it, that it tells you something's there, but it's really not. There is not really a triangle there, no matter how hard you look. In fact, there are three circles there that happen to have chunks out of them. That's an example of Gestalt. The other concept is the idea of figure ground relationship. I'm going to move myself up there. So figure ground relationship is when the background and the foreground are perceived to overlap in space. So you'll see in a second where the background could be so interesting and so well developed, and so is the foreground, the stuff you put in the front, that it's hard for people visually to decipher which is in the foreground and which is in the back. We like to know that. That's one of those human conditions when we look at art and design. We like to be able to assign background, foreground, and middle ground. Sometimes, though, the artwork is so interesting and so richly developed, it's hard for our mind to establish which is which. So we're going to see some examples of that also in a second. Okay. So here's some examples of that idea of figure ground relationship. You've probably seen this one before where you see the old vase and face. So is it two black faces facing each other, or is it a white vase? Your eyes and your mind may tell you one or the other, and you may even fight a little bit mentally to see which is which, but you're actually seeing tricks are played on you. Which is it? Is it the vase or is it the two faces? That's an example of figure ground relationship. Which is the background, which is the foreground? Here's another example of what looks like the Dark Knight. It looks like Batman, but if you flip it over, I'm going to flip it over the other way again. Let's go back and flip it over. Look at the yellow now. Take myself over here. If you look at the yellow, you should see Penguin, his arch enemy. So is it the black space is the background, or is the yellow space the background? And again, your eye and your mind kind of play tricks on you to determine which is which. Take a look one more time. There's the Dark Knight, there's Batman, and if you look at the yellow, it is Penguin. That's an example of figure ground relationship. Here's another example of figure ground relationship. You might have seen this before. Is it an old woman or is it a young woman? This is one that's a little more difficult. Sometimes if you Google this one, you'll see it a little more clearly. But if you look at the choker or the necklace of the woman, the young woman, it actually is the mouth of the old woman. Take a look at it for a second. You can even pause the video if you need to and study it for a second, and you should be able to see both. That's an example of figure ground relationship. So here are some artists throughout history who have used FigureGround Relationship. Some of these you might be familiar with. This is one of my favorite examples of this. If you take a look, there is that visual pull. Is it a skull? Is it a mirror? Is the woman sitting in front of the mirror? Is the woman actually part of the skull? Her hair, her bun in the back of her hair, is that part of an eye? Your mind and your eye work back and forth to determine what's foreground, what's background, and that's an example of FigureGround relationship. It's a really kind of unique thing that only happens in some of the finest, finely tuned kind of pieces of artwork. Let's take a look at one more. Here's a piece by M.C. Escher, and you might look at it on first glance and see the geese that are flying in midair, but of course then you look and you'll see these fish down below, and there's that transition, that space in the middle of this whole piece of artwork where there's kind of a combination. So what is background and what is foreground? That's an example of FigureGround relationship. So one last one of my favorites, a very high-end piece by Alberto Giacometti. He's an Italian artist who worked a lot with that whole idea of psychology. He actually completed this right around the time of World War II when there were a lot of bombings going on throughout Europe. And he was an Italian-based artist or Italian-born artist, but he wanted to show sort of that shell or skeleton of things that were bombed out. So you might look at it and go, what's more important, the man that's sort of roughly sketched in paint, or is the background? Sometimes there's this fight mentally. Which is it that I'm looking at? So here is a contemporary artist, Stephanie Ledoux, who actually uses this idea. What I like about her and her story is she actually, for quite a bit of time, traveled around Africa. And in her travels in Africa, she would collect the maps and the writings and wrapping paper even from different places and locations she traveled throughout Africa. And in her sketchbook, she would do sketches over top of those collaged maps and writings of the people that she would meet in Africa. So again, it's this sort of FigureGround relationship. Is the writing and the map in the background more important, or is it the person? She uses it so well to sort of camouflage different parts. If you look at this piece, there's actually a piece of wrapping paper that she stitched together, and it turns out that it ends up becoming part of the headdress of the African woman that you're seeing the profile of. Again, is it the paper? Is it the person's face and the headdress? Is it the written work in the background? What's more important? And do you notice how they sort of play with each other so that it's not just the background's kind of sitting in a boring way in the background? So here are some Hoover High School student examples. You're going to get a piece of illustration board. You're going to get some spray paint. We're going to go outside, and I'm going to give you a bunch of random stencils that really aren't anything. They're sort of junk stencils, and we're going to use them to create a really fun sort of non-objective background. So the background is going to be based on colors that you think will go well with the topic you choose. You're going to get 3 topics. We'll talk about that in a minute. But here are some examples of students from the past years to kind of help you. So this is one of my all-time favorites. And this young lady did it as if she was a marionette and being controlled. So if you look, she's actually drawn herself and a set of hands, and she's actually being controlled like a puppet, like a marionette. And if you look, most of the background is just blue and gray spray paint, and she had one colored pencil. She got an indigo blue colored pencil, and she drew over top of that drawing to achieve what you're seeing here. So the hands are beautifully drawn, the face is beautifully drawn, but you'll notice the hair sort of fades out towards the top and doesn't become as important. But you'll notice the background is also very busy. So it's this constant push and pull between background and the foreground. And it tells a very strong story. She actually chose to use this one as to try to illustrate an experience of someone being manipulated or controlled by things in their life. And I think you can imagine if you were linked to wires like a marionette, you definitely would feel controlled. Tells a very good narrative or good story. Here's one done by a young lady who actually tried to show the suggestion of feeling uncomfortable in her own skin. She didn't feel comfortable in her own skin. She didn't feel comfortable with who she was. And so she actually used wrapping paper, old books and magazines, and then spray painted over top of them and drew on top of them. And again, she only used one colored pencil. She used a dark blue colored pencil, and she actually got a white colored pencil towards the end to create the highlights. Just a couple more. So here's another one. and it's called Impatiently Waiting. And if you look at first glance, it may be hard to see, but it's actually someone peeking through a set of blinds. It's actually the blinds in the art classroom, impatiently waiting for someone to arrive. So if you look, that tells a really great narrative. And secondly, there's a great figure-ground relationship. Is the whole face there? No. Do we need the whole face to tell the story? No. And in fact, if you look, the hands aren't even all there. They're just sort of partially there and they fade out. This student used, believe it or not, the rocks that are in the driveway of our parking lot. They use stones, grass, and red and black paint. That's all that they use to do that. The one that I showed you first also used stones from our driveway here at the school, and also blades of grass, and a little bit of scrap rope that was laying out in the parking lot as well that I had gotten, that I have a junk pile of things. So you're only using found stencils and found things that I can supply for you to use to create the stencil. This one again uses rocks. Let's go ahead and I'll show you a couple more. So here's another young lady that wanted to do one about being thoughtful, about making a big decision. What I love about this one that's a little bit different is you can see that all of the strange shapes from the stencils that I gave her, and I gave her old cards that had holes cut out of them. She had scrap pieces of letters and all kinds of random things. You may be able to spot in the top right corner, you'll see the number 3 turned upside down. So old stencils that I had, she laid down, used yellow, blue, and green paint, sprayed this whole thing out, and then again drew over top of it with one colored pencil. This person didn't use a lot of Gestalt. They didn't use a lot of figure-ground relationship because most of the drawing is finished. It's well done, but if you were measuring it based on figure-ground relationship and Gestalt, most of the drawing's there. Most everything's been told to you, so there isn't a lot of unfinished, your eye having to finish it compared to some of the other ones, but it is still a very well done drawing. Here's one more. Here's a student who didn't really like drawing eyes and a lot of faces. They came to me and said, I'm not really big on drawing faces. And I said, well, you don't have to draw faces, or you could avoid certain parts. So this one was about friendship, the relationship between friends and best friends specifically. And if you look at the red on the drawing, or excuse me, on the work, she actually used her grandmother's old lace tablecloth and red spray paint and spray painted through the lace to get those red marks that are all over the drawing. And then she put a drawing of her and her best friend over top of that. Here's another one, beautifully done, about being carefree, about not caring about anything in the world. That happened to be a windy day when she took the picture. And you'll notice that she's erased parts of the hair so that the spray paint shows through, so that she was able to get that Gestalt. So is their hair really there, or is it just empty space from the background? That's a great example of figure-ground relationship. Another one, again, not probably particularly good about the idea of figure ground, because most of the drawing is there. It doesn't sort of fade out in parts, but it is well done. And again, this person used stencils, and you can see where you have a white cloudy parts around the face are actually, again, some of the stones and rocks from around the parking lot. I think we're close to the end. This one is about a person who was struggling with quitting smoking. And you'll notice what's beautifully done is you'll see the cigarettes sort of lined up in a row, trying to come towards him like an army of addictive little cigarettes heading towards him in the background. And at the very end, this young man took the red spray paint and took it very close with a nozzle at the very tip of the illustration board and got that sort of dripping spray almost like oozing over top of you. So he wanted to create this sort of deathly smoke feel at the top. In every case, you'll notice a really great story being told. This one was the first year we ever did the assignment, and there wasn't really an assignment to tell a narrative or to tell a story. So I'm not showing you as the best example, but I am showing you technically this has such high craftsmanship and attention to detail. This was actually taken on the floor of Hollister. She loved the lighting there and put her cell phone up high, took a selfie, and you can actually see the floor of Hollister kind of showing in the bottom. Another one on the first year that we ever did it, not necessarily following all of the objectives that you have in your assignment, but it is a great example of figure-ground relationship where the background beautifully is sort of worked into the foreground. And you'll notice the blue leaves that are off in there are actually, she sprayed those on with leaves that we actually had from the trees here at school. And then after a while, you can see some of them tan on the left, or on the right, excuse me, and on the left, they're blue because she colored them in with colored pencil. One last one telling secrets. So this person decided to do a whole assignment about two kids telling secrets. Obviously, they took photos outside of school to kind of get this motivation from their brother and sister. So you have a choice between three themes. So you want to think of these themes very carefully. Fear, phobias, or obsession. I want you to create a narrative. So you need to either use yourself or someone in class as inspiration, have them pose, take multiple photos, think about dramatic lighting. If I'm trying to show a fear or a phobia, lighting is key. Think about those great horror or suspense movies. Lighting is key. So think about dramatic lighting to help tell your story, and think about a dramatic point of view. If you're going to be using your phone and you're going to be taking pictures of the subject, far away is not going to create drama. Up close, very dramatic shots are going to make it more interesting. The second option is to do a yourself or someone else as a Greek god or goddess, showing either their powers or their shortcoming. So I think about Medusa as an example of Greek goddesses. Obviously, she would have had a head full of serpents and snakes, and we know that if you looked at her, you turned to stone. But she also had shortcomings. She had vices or things that made her less powerful. How could you make someone in this classroom or someone that you know appear to look like Medusa, giving them those qualities, but then making them look like they had some kind of magical mythological power? Think about that and think about what kind of background you would use with spray paint to create that. And the last one, it's kind of clipped off by my face here, let me move that, is the idea of social justice to suggest change. So you want to think of yourself in some way or a subject, again, taking photos of somebody, that you could create a message showing about social justice, acceptance, change. A lot of our culture and community right now is about the idea of identifying social problems and social issues and bringing awareness to people. So you could choose that topic or one of the other two up above. Your job is to create two preliminary sketches in full value in your sketchbook, much like we've done all the time. Sorry, guys, let me do this. And you should also then be ready to re-evaluate it on these areas. Composition. Did you use UPick that you've learned since freshman year to help you create a composition? FigureGround relationship. Did you show that the background has almost the same amount of importance as the foreground? Mechanics. Does it look well drawn? Does it look like you studied from a photo? Making sure that you have a photo in front of you working from. I would highly suggest not using your phone. Send the picture to me, email it to me, and I will print it. Value. Are you showing a feeling of three-dimensionalism so that it feels fully formed, it has development? You've learned about facial planes now, so you should know how to create a face that has planes and different movements and angles so that it seems like it has lighting on it. Use of media. You're going to be using some new things. You're going to be using spray paint. You're going to use colored pencil on the spray paint. How well did you use them? How well did you control them so that you were able to actually get them to do what you wanted them to do? And at the same time, create a figure ground relationship and a little bit of Gestalt. Artistic professionalism, that's just a big fancy way of saying craftsmanship, attention to detail, neatness, fine-tuning things so that it's at a level that is at least at an art 3, if not better. So obviously the finer the craft, the higher the level of quality, those little details that others might miss are going to be judged obviously in that area. And the last one is persistence and goal setting. Are you in here every day diligently trying to grow and improve as an artist? So when we see your sketches and your photos and where you were and what you end up with your end results, does it clearly show that you've made growth? Have you gone beyond and you've been in here every day working to achieve so that you could go beyond where you were when you started the assignment? And really that's what it's all about, the idea of growth. Have you improved from where you were? So those are the areas of evaluation. I'll remind you that you need to have 2 photo references at least, but I would take lots of photos. You're going to email or upload those photos, to Schoology eventually to show that you have at least 2 photo references. You're going to develop 2 sketches in your sketchbook that must have full value, approximately what you want them to look like, your final vision. There won't have spray paint in your sketchbook, but they should just be the sketches. Again, should be uploaded to Schoology. You're going to go outside. We're going to take about 2 class days, probably at the maximum 1 or 2, depending on the weather. I have a big tarp. We're going to go outside. You'll spray paint. You'll create your background. And then you will then have about 2.5 weeks to create the final work, making sure that you select one colored pencil that relates to the background you chose. And eventually I'll hand you a white colored pencil to create contrast and value, but you only get one colored pencil. That is the challenge. So that's the assignment in a nutshell. Think about those 3 options as you're going to choose. Are you going to do a Greek god or goddess, showing either their powers or their shortcomings, their kryptonite, so to speak? Are you going to choose to do a fear, a phobia, or an obsession? Those are all lumped together because those are all sort of nightmarish scenarios, a fear, a phobia, or an obsession. or you're going to choose to do a piece of work that talks about social justice, something that pushes the idea of awareness or change to help your audience understand a little bit more about that topic. So I can't wait to see what you do. Make sure you read over this carefully. Make sure you look at the hyperdoc and make sure that you see me or email me if you have any questions. Good luck, everybody.